Hi, my name is Sue Zimmer. I tutor writing, oral communications, and science here at the SSC. This is going to be a quick video that will cover some tips that I've picked up along the way about studying medical terminology. First off, let me give you my contact information. My email address is yszimmer@yccc.edu. If you forget that, you can just go to your YC Outlook email and type in Sue Zimmer, and I will pop up. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only one, and then you can email me to ask questions. So let's dive right into this material. First off, when it comes to learning medical terminology, the most important thing to do is to make sure that you read any material that your instructor has given you or that's in your textbook from start to finish. A really common problem that I've noticed is that students start to get a little bit anxious and maybe start to skip over material. So if you find yourself doing that in your studies, just stop what you're doing, take a deep breath, and reread the material and start working on it again. So the first time you do a read through of your material, I suggest that you don't read that material with the idea of studying like fresh in the front of your mind. You just want to let the material sort of wash over you on that first run through. Then I suggest that you actually read it again. Now on your second read through of any materials you've been given, now is a great opportunity on that second read through to start taking notes on what you've read. Now that you know the content a little bit better, on that second read through, you start to not get as lost in what the material is saying. So taking notes becomes more practical on that second run through. The next piece of advice that I'm going to give you is the one that my students love to hate, and that is that you should make flashcards. There's a lot of ways for you to make flashcards. You can go the traditional route and get, those little cards that you can get from the store and write them out by hand. I am partial to that one. You can also use, there are various apps out there that you can use to make flashcards like Quizlet, and I know that there are many others. But the idea is basically the same. But if you're using one of the websites, maybe it takes a little less time and can be a little bit easier on your hands. I will tell you that if you do decide to buy physical flashcards, you should go grab them from the Dollar Tree, because that tends to be the cheapest place that you can get physical flashcards. Whenever I start studying for any science, be it medical terminology or anything else, the first thing I'll do is go down to the Dollar Tree with a $20 bill and buy as many flashcard packs as I possibly can. Now, let's talk about how you would make these flashcards. Flashcards need to be very brief. The information that you put on it needs to be brief. You don't want to put a lot of info in there. You want to make sure that you separate the medical terms that you put onto the flashcard into its separate parts, meaning you don't want to put an entire word on a flashcard. You just want to put a prefix, a suffix, or a combining form on one flashcard with the definition on the back of it. Because in medical terminology, we can put terms together in many different ways to mean something else. That means that if you know what each one of those three components means, then you can pull apart any word. So this is really about just memorizing the content and the little bits of it so that you can translate that word into something meaningful later on. So the reason these flashcards work so well is because they make it so easy for you to study at any moment. You can study for 5 minutes when your kid is in the tub. You can study for half an hour when you're on break at work. It just makes it so you have those right in your hand. You can do them at any time. Also, the act of making flashcards is another way to memorize material. It takes time to make flashcards, and it takes time to look up definitions to put on the back. So making flashcards counts as study time. Studying flashcards counts as study time. None of that is wasted time. It all counts. It's all different ways that your brain will start to learn this information. So I will tell you that my students that use flashcards are my students that tend to do far better than my students that don't use flashcards. And that's true whether they use an app like Quizlet or they use the physical flashcards. Another tip for you is that you can incorporate your senses to help you learn medical terminology. I noticed that a lot of students don't recognize that they can sort of use themselves to learn things. Like, you are an anatomical model. So if you can learn what things are called on your own body, it just allows you to have a more holistic approach to this learning. So what I mean by using your senses is, well, we're using our sight and hearing when we do a flashcard, and then when we say a flashcard out loud, obviously we're using our hearing, but we can also use our sense of touch to learn these terms. For example, if we think about corona means crown. So when you read a medical term like corona, the first thing that I usually do is touch my head and say corona crown, head, and I'm touching my head. So associate a term with a region on your body is helpful. Every time you do it, you touch that body part that you're associating it with. Another thing that you can do is sometimes there are medical terms that don't necessarily mean like a region-specific term. So like, for what I mean is like A-N, that term, that means without. So when I would learn the term "and," I might make some sort of movement like "and," like I'm cutting it off, right? I'm saying "and," without, or I'm nodding my head no. Like, I'm incorporating my whole body and all of my senses as much as I can when I learn that term. It's true, it's like scientifically proven that the more of your whole body that you can put into your learning, the easier that learning actually will become. Another tip is that you could try to associate the medical term with something that you already know well. So for example, if you have a word you can't quite, for whatever reason you can't memorize it, try to associate it with a word or maybe even a rhyme, something that you do know well. The example that pops into my head is the prefix hypo. So hypo means below or a deficit. So I remember hypo because it rhymes with the word low, hypo, low. So the word low rhymes with hypo, and it's very similar in meaning to the word deficit or below. So in my head, hypo really means low, but in reality, that really means the same thing as a deficit or below, doesn't it? So make as many of those associations as you possibly can. We say here at the SSC that studying is a lot like eating. You have to do it several times a day. If you try to cram everything in at one sitting, you probably won't do well. If you try to skip an entire day of eating, you also probably won't be feeling well. When it comes to medical terminology, you have to study the content every single day. You shouldn't just sit down at one time and try to learn everything in one sitting. Try to spread it out over several sessions. Don't underestimate the power of a 5 or 10 minute study session. Do your flashcards at any moment that you can do them. Bring your flashcards out with you everywhere. So when that moment arrives, you can just use them. Or if you're using the app on your phone, get that app up and start doing flashcards over and over and over again. The more exposure that you give yourself to your medical terminology study, really the better you're going to do. Memorization is just repetition, 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 and that's what medical terminology is. It will get easier the more often you do it. That's where I'm going to end for today. Thanks for listening. If you have more questions, reach out to me. If you see me in the SSC, feel free to come walk up to me or send me an email, whatever works for you. Thank you and good luck.